keeping in touch and ensuring our teams are doing well from a well-being standpoint is a top priority. And number two, hiring. We're going to grow our team by 40, 45 headcount this year. And it's harder than ever. I've never seen a hiring environment so tight as this one. Starting with recruiters. We can't hire enough recruiters. And when we have recruiters, it's hard to get people to apply and interview. So it's a really competitive hiring marketplace. And that's going to be a huge area of focus this year.
This is Sales Ops Demystified, the number one most downloaded podcast in sales operations. We invite the brightest minds in sales ops onto the show to deconstruct the what, why, and how behind rep productivity, forecasting, metrics, and all things revenue. This podcast is brought to you by Ebsta, a revenue intelligence platform used to identify risk in the pipeline and score customer engagement, and is sponsored by the Global Sales Operations Association and the UK Revenue Operations Network. Hello and welcome to another very special episode of the Sales Ops Demystified podcast. Today we're joined by Akira Mamizuka, who is the Global Sales Operations VP at LinkedIn. Akira, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thanks for having me. Very excited to spend some time with folks from the sales ops trades.
Now, I'm quoting directly from your LinkedIn, Akira, but it says here, to work in sales operations is to be inside the engine room in the middle of the action. Was this something that you knew about sales ops before you made your way into the field? Or was there some other motivation for joining sales ops?
I'd say I had a notion of how it would be, but it turned out even more special and exciting than I expected. I started my career in consulting. I spent 7-8 years in management consulting. My last firm was McKinsey. And at that point in time, I had done a lot of work in strategy and started to focus more on sales-related topics. So how to optimize distribution channels, incentive models, reseller strategy, coverage strategy. So I started to develop a lot of passion about sales operations, sales strategy. But at some point in time, I really wanted to transition from being an advisor to being an operator. And fast forward, that's exactly how it feels. It really feels to be in the middle of the engine room, the middle of the action. That's my passion.
I have seen this a few times, this transition from consulting / advising into sales ops. What is it like? Are you just basically doing sales ops work for clients when you're in consulting?
Partially, because in consulting, you do a lot of the diagnostic work, the recommendation, and at times an implementation plan. But you're never really running an operation. You're never really in charge of delivering a fiscal year plan. You're never really in charge of delivering a forecast, solving real problems. So I got to experiment a little bit of the function, but I really wanted to get my hands dirty and again be in the middle of the action.
And what a journey it's been. I think it's 7 years at LinkedIn, starting as head of sales ops in LATAM, I believe, all the way to now VP. What, like, if you had to sum up the sales ops journey at LinkedIn for the last 7 years in one word, what would that be?
Wow. Transformative.
I can imagine the growth and change within LinkedIn over the past 7 years would have been incredible. Could you, right now, if it's okay, just give an idea of the structure of the sales ops function and also maybe the sales teams as well, if that can be done fast, just to give the audience a bit of context as to how sales ops fits into LinkedIn?
Absolutely. So we have at the highest level in LinkedIn, we have two types of businesses that sell to companies. We have a media business, which sells advertising for companies on LinkedIn. And then we have SaaS businesses that sell subscription services to companies. Within SaaS, you have lines of business that helps HR organizations and talent acquisition organizations to hire people to LinkedIn. And then we have a business called Sales Solutions that helps sales organizations to be more productive and successful through LinkedIn. In terms of SaaS, which is what we're responsible for, we have a traditional sales dev, hunter, farmer model. And we have around 4,000 sales reps globally across those different functions. And we do have a sales operations function that partners with sales leadership to make sure our sales teams are productive and successful, to make sure we are allocating the right resources in the right places, to make sure we are maximizing our penetration in the markets we want to expand. So sales ops has evolved over the years. When I started, we had essentially one type of sales ops professional who was responsible for everything. As we grew and scale, we realized that for us to continue to evolve the function, we had to develop more specialization. So now we have, within sales ops, we have teams specialized only on planning and performance, on systems and tools, on business intelligence. So we're now in the process of building that specialization and those foundations because that's the future of sales ops at LinkedIn.
Amazing. So 4,000 reps on the SaaS side. Roughly how many sales ops people?
We have roughly around 200.
Incredible. So that ratio is 1 to 20. So I tried to track the ratio between ops to reps. And the average, I think, is about 1 to 15. So that sounds about right. What do you think? And this, again, is probably like a pretty big picture question or maybe hard to answer. What do you think is like the one thing that you have done in sales ops at LinkedIn that had not the biggest, but had a really good impact?
There's a few things I'm proud of that I worked with my teams. But if I were to quote one change that I drove that has been quite impactful and successful, and I alluded to this change a little bit, which is in the past, a lot of our decisions and process and intelligence, they were very much fragmented, and they sat with the regional teams on internationally and the US. And that was helpful in our first 5 or 10 years of our journey because it really empowered the regional teams to grow as fast as possible. But at some point in time, we realized that we needed like more decision-making and intelligence at the global level. Not that we're shifting away from the regions, that we're better balancing where decision-making and process and intelligence is by building processes, reporting, modeling, forecasting at the global level. So moving those decisions and not removing, but sharing those decisions from the regional teams with the global teams. One example, from a planning standpoint, the process to define how much we're going to grow and how many headcount we need by type of headcount and where those headcount would sit. In the past was very much that decision, this process sat with the regional teams, which created some degree of inconsistency, some not really optimal decision-making and resource allocation. I helped move the planning process from the regional teams to the global teams, and now we're much more streamlined. We're able to make better decisions and faster, driven top-down.
Makes total sense. What is it, would you say, it's like your core focus within SaaS sales ops at LinkedIn for the rest of 2021?
Well, if I were to quote one only, allow me to quote two, but number one remains employee well-being. Although LinkedIn is doing very well in the context of the global pandemic, we still have a lot of people who are struggling to work remotely, or they're taking care of an ill family member. So keeping in touch and ensuring our teams are doing well from a well-being standpoint is a top priority. And number two, hiring. We're going to grow our team by 45 headcount this year. and it's harder than ever. I've never seen a hiring environment so tight as this one. Starting with recruiters, we can't hire enough recruiters, and when we have recruiters, it's hard to get people to apply and interview. So it's a really competitive hiring marketplace, and that's going to be a huge area of focus this year.
So that's going to be if my math is correct, approximately 25% increase in headcount. Did you say before the end of the year? Before
the end of the year, yeah. Or yeah. The fiscal year, we are on a July-June fiscal, so we just started our new fiscal year. And just for a bit of context, this year we also absorbed a function that runs operations for our, what I call is customer operations. So it's a team that helps sort out customer issues. It's a team of 1,000 people, and we have a team of 20 or so that run operations for the contact center. So that's part of our scope as well. My teams now go beyond sales ops to include customer operations as well. So that's included in those numbers.
Amazing. I mean, you may have to change the title to RevOps, but that's a whole different story. Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to ignore that long pause as I scramble to find my mouse. So I'll start that again to make it easy actually for the recording to come out. And so thanks, Tom, and thanks, Akira. It was really interesting just to hear a bit about your background and what's been going on at LinkedIn. First piece is maybe a slightly cheeky question, but based on you're talking about your starting in consulting and then moving to sales operations. Having made the move that way, I wondered, and full disclosure, I'm essentially in consulting around RevOps, but I wonder what's your most sort of frustrating thing with consultants, or what was the thing that you thought that they just don't deliver enough value on for a business?
Well, there's a few things that made me transition careers. But if I were to quote the number one piece is, at some point you learn the whole toolkit, which is a really valuable toolkit, but you get frustrated or you miss seeing the results or the impact of your work. At times, your last interaction with a client is a meeting where you deliver a presentation, a recommendation, or a PowerPoint deck. And oftentimes you learn after a few months or after a year that the client didn't have the resources or the capabilities to implement any of the recommendations. So that was one of maybe the most frustrating or disappointing aspects of consulting, in my opinion.
Okay. And have you used any consultants since? Have you got any from the other side of the fence now as a practitioner, having people support you? Have you found any need for using consultants or any downsides in working with consultants?
Well, I don't see downsides. I think within the right context with the right goals, there's a lot of value in working with consulting firms. I'd say at LinkedIn, there are so many ex-consultants like myself. There's a very high number that there is almost like a little bit of an allergic reaction when you mention hiring consultants to come and do project work, just because there's so much expertise in-house. So we almost operate on a little bit of an extreme end of the spectrum. Often we rarely work with consultants. But having said that, there's a few situations when I engage with them, didn't end up closing a project, but there'll be an opportunity soon.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting to think about. And I said, the approach that we sort of take is we want to be sort of active through the process. So exactly as you say, so that our last interaction with someone isn't, here's a load of recommendations. It's like, here's all the stuff we're going to go carry out. If you're happy, let's go do it. Otherwise, otherwise you're at the mercy of whether it gets done. But no, that was it's just interesting to understand and also to see that your desire to be in, actually to sort of see something through to the end and in charge of running the show. And I guess the other thing if you're consulting at the start of the journey, while you may know the playbook and you may trust the playbook, you've not necessarily seen it always proved out. And so proving it out and working out the little iterations and the changes and the very specific things for a certain use case that might, go beyond that. I suppose that must be quite interesting about being hands-on now in a new environment.
Totally.
And then the other thing that was really interesting to me, as you talked about, is just, was that process where you sort of took back kind of the planning process from regional teams back to the global team so that you could have a sort of better kind of strategy. But the thing that really interested me was you said actually it was absolutely the right thing that those regions had autonomy. So as your journey, it presumably started, then the autonomy went out to the regions so they could grow fast. And then it was like figuring out the time when it was right to take back that process and run it as a more streamlined global operation. I just wondered if there was any markers around that, things that helped you make those decisions, and also to realize when the time was right to give teams a bit more autonomy and when it was time to run it coming from a global perspective. Does that make sense? Sorry, quite a long question.
Yeah, absolutely. I will share a couple observations or insights from the first moment when it was really valuable to have autonomy at the regional level, and then an insight when we felt it was the moment to centralize decisions from a planning standpoint. So in the first wave of growth, there was a lot of value of having autonomy and decision making at the regional level, because the regional teams they cover a huge surface area. For example, in Latin America, we had now we have two offices, Brazil and Mexico. But when I started, it was only Brazil. I had just opened the office down there, covering the whole Latin America, 40 countries or so. From being in Brazil, covering all of Latin America, I would always have a much better understanding of like where our next dollar or next headcount should go from an opportunity standpoint, much better than somebody being headquarters. So, for example, we knew when the moment was right for us to build a presence in Mexico, because we had scaled the business to a stage where it was not sustainable or productive anymore to have reps flying from São Paulo to Mexico or to cover northern Latin America. So that was one example of why autonomy, regional level autonomy, was important in the first moment of the journey. But then it came up a point in time when our company was already public. We were acquired by Microsoft, and then we started to have a lot more rigor in terms of things such as margins. Not only about how fast our revenue is growing, but how productive those dollars are. And then we realized that we had to make some tough trade-offs in terms of, okay, where the next dollar goes. And then when we started to look at ROI of investments and headcount investments between the regions, we saw that we were making investments that would be much better made in other area or other types of resources or headcount. So that's when I started to realize that we need to take a much smarter top-down portfolio approach from an investment standpoint. And really to do that well, you gotta move decision making top-down.
Brilliant. I think that's just super helpful and really clear. And I guess it really tracks with a company's sort of maturity journey. And when you're in rapid growth, the more autonomous that things can be. Efficiency is not necessarily the name of the game; it's just growth. But once you're a bit more established, and now you have more stakeholders to worry about, and really treating that as an investment, that was, I think, really helpful. Great. And then the final piece was just you're just talking about sort of the well-being priority. And I'm just wondering, because I think that must be it's likely a massive concern for most people still, and also a real one of the benefits, I think, to come out of the pandemic. Not to say that people weren't concerned with their employees and staff well-being before, but I think a renewed focus and understanding that as the business, one, we can trust people to work from home and still be productive. And now we can sort of it's just moving, I think, the understanding of employment forward in that sense. So I just wondered if you had any insights on how you're trying to make sure that you're looking after the well-being of your team, and any things you found particularly helpful to sort of progress that.
Absolutely. And I'll share some thoughts in terms of some of the thinking and actions we implemented at a company level. First, we realized that ultimately we want to have an impact in the world because we're LinkedIn, but it always starts with the self. We have to ensure that our selves we are in a good place, so then we can have an impact in the company and then the world. But it always starts with the self and well-being. So at a company level, over the last 12 months, we've launched many programs to make sure employees are in a good place from a well-being standpoint. We offered 3 months called EFA, Emergency Family Leave. Forgot what the acronym means, but if you have a family member that is struggling, or you need to take care of a child, you can take up to 3 months of fully paid leave. Last April, we gave a week off to the whole company. We said, "You've done amazingly well. You need some rest as a company." So we shut down for a full week. And the wonderful thing about the model is you come back after a week and you don't have to go through 1,000 emails. You're not feeling behind on that project because the whole company stopped. For people like myself, who's an immigrant, my family is back in Brazil. We have a program called Work from Any Country, where I can go back and work from Brazil for a month without my manager approval. So there's other examples, but we are doubling down on making sure that our employees are in a good place and they can be productive and successful at the company.
That sounds amazing. Really wonderful things to be doing, and really obviously great leadership, and just that investing in those two things, investing in your employees and investing in flexibility and understanding. And I'm sure from your perspective, and presumably the perspective of your team, you've really appreciated that, and that helps get the most out of you. And as you said, to having that extra week off and coming back without 1,000 emails and just a whole week's worth of work to catch up must make a real difference. And we've spoken to some other people and saying how they saw at the start of the pandemic productivity was rising because people were actually doing more from home, and then their biggest concerns was how they got their team to work less because productivity was starting to dip and overworking was becoming a big deal. And actually, we've got so much time that we can give productively before we'll be tapped out. So really helpful to hear some of the things that we've been doing around that. So thanks very much. Tom, you're going to come back?
I'm back. Akira, final and most important question. Who in the world of sales ops would you most like to take for lunch?
I would say a guy who was highly influential to my career at LinkedIn called Brian Frank. He's a legend in the sales operations world. He was VP of global operations at LinkedIn for a decade. And a lot of the things that we have in place, and a lot of success that we still have today is because of this guy, Brian Frank. And I have a very close personal connection with him. These days, he's COO at Cameo. And that's the guy I would take out for lunch.
Incredible. Brian, shout out to Brian. Interesting to go from sales leader to COO. That does make sense, though. Akira, I want to thank you so much. The 7 years at LinkedIn must have been, as you said, transformational. So I want to thank you for coming on and being so open with learnings, with your experience. I think it's going to be incredibly valuable for the audience. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, Alex. Really enjoyed talking to you guys today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sales Ops Demystified podcast. If you are listening on a podcast listening application, then please subscribe, rate, and review. And if you have any questions about the show, if you know a guest, or if you have any questions about sales operations, just hit me up at tomhunt@ebster.com. That's tomhunt@ebster.com.